up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to another Dan vs. review. This is the review for Season 1, Episode 19, Dan vs. Burgerphile. So, before I get onto the recap of the episode, first, the link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below, as per usual. And as per usual as well with the review, let's start off with a quick recap of the episode, which is, poor customer service forces Dan to vow vengeance against the burger place in town, especially the manager. But good thing a friendly cashier seems interested in helping him. Yeah, I feel like there are just a bunch of things to talk about with this particular episode. Now, I will start off with Dan's intelligence, but mostly because it's the smallest topic I want to talk about, and it's just a couple of little things that I noticed throughout the episode. Like, he says, Sic semper tyrannis, and initially when I was listening to that, I was thinking to myself, I even think I said aloud, oh, this sounds like legitimate Latin, and sure enough, I was actually right, because it basically... It's directed towards tyrants usually. It's the phrase that suggests that negative outcomes will or should befall tyrants, which is basically how Dan perceives the manager of Burgerphile to be, so it's kind of surprising that he even knows that, and, I mean... It's not French, it's Latin. It's not French, like Cashier seems to think, but it is Latin. Even so, I was incredibly surprised that Dan even knew that at all, but again, the whole patchwork of knowledge thing, but it still surprises me sometimes, the things he does and doesn't know, but I guess apparently he knows a little bit of Latin at this point, and he also has displayed some knowledge of consequential and sequential events, which doesn't seem like a very important detail, but it actually is. Most kids don't even understand that kind of concept. The part of your brain that controls being able to judge consequences, foresee actions, and, you know, make proper judgments. The part of the brain that controls all that is the last part of the brain to actually fully develop, and it doesn't usually hit until like mid-20s. And I don't know, it seems like sometimes Dan's mental growth was stunted for the longest, like it probably like stopped in childhood, so it's kind of interesting that he was able to recognize potential judgment calls and consequential events, like when he says, you know, do you know how long it takes to starve to death, or the effect that having a chained up corpse will have on business? Like the fact that he just whips that out shows that he has incredible knowledge of, again, of consequences and judgment in a way. I mean, granted, he's still a man-child, but, you know, it was kind of crazy. I didn't disapprove of something Dan did, which is concerning, and another topic for maybe another time, if it is a little bit more severe. Another big thing that I noticed throughout the entirety of the episode was the constant jabs at least the food service or the customer service industry. Like, I was noticing the continuous jabs. I think I even mentioned it a couple times in the reaction itself. But the idea with, you know, the customer always being right. It's not always true, but it is kind of true in this case, and it's something that it's a policy that most companies tend to adopt anyways, whether they like it or not. But I mean, at the drive-thru, Dan asked 4 different times not to have cheese on his burger. I counted. It was 4 different times. The cashier even confirmed a couple of times to be sure, and the order was still wrong, and the manager immediately believed that the customer had gotten it wrong. So, what was his name? Jeff or whatever? I don't even care. That's how irritated I got with him. Jeff immediately seemed to believe that Dan was the one who got the order wrong, and it wasn't the fault of the business itself, or the manager, or whoever was taking the order. It could have been Jeff, honestly. The voice kind of sounded a little bit like it. And the manager didn't even offer any condolences for the incorrect order, whether it was on the customer or the business. The fact that the order was wrong, and it could have affected Dan's health, and the fact that the manager didn't offer like any sort of, like, you know, refund, future free meal or something like that, which is what most food service industries would do, but the fact that that did not happen? Yeah, it's... Again, customer service and food service industries don't always like this rule. I mean, my sister has been in the customer service industry for long enough. I was kind of in the food industry for a little while as well, so I kind of understand that policy, and I understand that people who have to deal with that policy don't necessarily like it. But it's there for a reason. They have to abide by the rule. They have to keep the customer as happy and as satisfied as they possibly can, because, again, it's called a customer service industry for a reason. It's customer-centric in a way. Having a little bit of inside knowledge with myself working at a restaurant for a while, and as well as, you know, a dining hall in a university for a while, the fact that my sister's been in the customer service industry for a while as well, whether it was food, whether it was, you know, being a vet tech, or working in Old Navy of all things, but I have a lot of knowledge of that, so it kind of resulted in this episode being one of the few rare times that I wholeheartedly sided with Dan. I don't normally do that. Like, sometimes I'll eventually side with him, like, yeah, I can get it, it's kind of annoying and stuff, but this was one of the few instances where I wholeheartedly sided with him, because yeah, the customer service industry is kind of a pain in the arse to deal with, both on the side of the customer and consumer, as well as the provider of said customer service. Again, whether it's food, clothes, just whatever. And there are good and bad on both sides. Like, sure, that they're friggin' tyrants like Jeff, but then there's also, you know, the friendly, helpful cashiers like Hortense. Still a weird name, by the way, but more on that a little, or at least more on Hortense a little bit later, not necessarily on the name. But also, even on the customer side, like, sometimes they can be a little bit overbearing in nature. They can be real pains in the arse sometimes. They can be so entitled. I hate it when customers are entitled. And again, I haven't worked in the industry in a while, but I hear enough stories from enough people, especially my sister. Far too many entitled people. But on the flip side, there can also be fairly, you know, calm and easygoing and reasonable customers. So there's good and bad on both sides, but it doesn't matter because the industry's policy, more often than not, is the customer is always right. That's just how it works. Jeff, you're an idiot. You're a manager, and you don't even know this shite. You're supposed to. You're the freaking manager. Sorry, kind of rant. But in addition to the riffs on the customer service industry, and I'm sorry that I keep saying those two words in particular, and they may irk some people, but I promise that's probably going to be happening less throughout the rest of this review, but in addition to those, like, jokes, riffs, whatever, there were also a few Gandhi references, which, like, I feel like I should have picked up on, but I didn't. But it's kind of helpful that I watched this episode again, because then I'm like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. But yes, there are some Gandhi references in here, because Gandhi is fairly well known for frequently starving himself in public in order to, you know, for his beliefs at least, including wanting Britain to grant India independence, which eventually happened and kind of eventually worked. And similarly, Dan does something very similar. I apologize for those words. Dan basically vows revenge because his honorable wish of the manager taking responsibility for the error of the order and, you know, being reasonable about the situation was not honored. So he kind of did something similar to what Gandhi did, or at least went to the same kind of extreme, and basically chained himself. Yes, a big old thick chain with a big old thick padlock, chained himself to a freaking cashier, whatever those machines are called, cash machine? No, there's a specific word for it, but you guys know what I'm talking about. And even throughout the episode, Dan doesn't give up on his quest to find justice throughout the entirety of the episode. Kind of similar to Gandhi. I mean, denying other people buying him a burger since he calls his mission one of principle. Like, you know, he's not gonna eat anything, he's not gonna move, he's not gonna do friggin' anything. Even Chris and Elise are a little bit surprised by this, but I mean, what can they do? They can't freaking control Dan. They cannot control Dan of all people. While it wasn't necessarily the same as Gandhi, he still pulled as extreme of a stunt as Gandhi did, so hence the references. Now that I've got the parodies, riffs, and references out of the way, let's talk about probably one of the most interesting aspect of this episode, and that was the relationship that was starting to develop between Dan and not Chris and Elise, but rather the cashier of Burgerphile, Hortense. Still a weird name, by the way. I've still never heard that name. For one thing, this was the first time that Hortense had an active role in any episode. I believe that she'd been seen like at least 2 or 3 times for, like, you know, brief moments in other episodes, and I don't even remember if she necessarily had any speaking lines. I have to go through all those reactions again, and I just don't have the time right now, but I'm pretty sure that she has been seen before. But this was the first time that she had a very active role, even in the opening scene before the title card came on the screen. She had more voice lines, she had more screen time, and it's like, okay, she's definitely going to become an active player, especially, you know, when she was getting all googly-eyed, whatever the frick you would call it. Dan of all people. But even after the title card had appeared on the screen and when Dan and Chris were starting to have a conversation and Dan mentioned Hortense specifically by name, Chris immediately decided to call her his girlfriend, which, you know, despite not being an active character until now, it potentially signified a side plot of the episode, which again, furthered what I had talked about in the opening credits with her having more screen time and more voice lines as well. So it just kind of reinforced that idea. And of course my suspicions were confirmed when, even very early on in the episode, Hortense started taking a liking to Dan, so it was just like, yep, she's definitely going to become an active player in this. Hortense's growing affections of Dan were very evident, surprising, and something I was even kind of rooting for by the end of the episode, which is kind of weird. Like, she kept seeing him as very confident, as intelligent, and so principled, and I don't know why, but for some reason, despite Dan's character, I was, for some reason, actively rooting for their relationship, for like something to happen, and I wasn't sure why, but I was. And then I want to say about midway through the episode, it was actually Hortense who confirmed to Chris and Elise, saying that she was Dan's girlfriend, and I'm like, holy shnikes, that just happened! Somebody actually said they were Dan's girlfriend. Dan's girlfriend. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that. It is still shocking. What? But then it all goes downhill super fast when at the very end of the episode, Hortense is promoted to regional manager, which means that she's going to move away, like, 20 miles away to Santa Monica, and at the time I was thinking, Santa Monica is not far from LA. I would know, I've been there. I've been through LAX and I've been to Santa Monica, so I'm like, it's not that far, but I don't exactly know. But it was interesting because Dan lets Hortense go. He lets her become the regional manager and move away. He won't let her give up on her dreams, and he won't have Hortense regret Dan. So, I mean, Dan seems capable of understanding, relationships to some extent, and it was still a surprising move that he did this for somebody. He did something nice for somebody else. What the heck? Who is this character that I've been watching? Honestly. And there was the almost kiss scene at the very end, and I was just like, oh, it didn't happen. Well, I mean, I don't know, maybe it was a combination of knowing it was a kid's show, or that, she had an active role and was suddenly like, nope, you're gonna get tossed out, basically, or something along. I don't exactly know. It was kind of bittersweet, but not, majorly bittersweet. Holy crap, though, was I an idiot and dim as hell. I think throughout the entirety of this series up to this point, no, throughout the entirety of me watching the first season, I had basically assumed that Dan was in his 20s, his mid-20s or something like that, and by proxy I estimated that Chris and Elise were also in their I figured that they were all just in their mid to maybe late 20s or something like that, and I didn't know how old Hortense was. It should have clued me in that she was a teenager, I want to say she's 16 or 17, something like that, but she's still a mid, not quite late teenage years, but no. I was horribly wrong. I really should have guessed that Hortense was a teenager, that much should have been obvious enough, but no. Where I got it supremely wrong was the fact that Dan was actually in his mid-30s, and and I watched my reaction again after realizing that, after coming to know about that fact, and I'm like, oh my god, how did I root for this? There is something wrong with me. He was about twice her age, and I rooted for— oh my god, I'm such the worst person in the freaking world. I'm an idiot. I'm a freaking idiot. Even if Dan had been in his 20s, it should have clued me in that it just would have been weird. It wouldn't have worked. So I mean, the whole bittersweet ending at the end of the episode with Dan letting Hortense go, it seems like the right move to do, especially considering the age gap, because holy crap, that's weird and messed up. So messed up. No, just no. I'm not even gonna. I realized my mistake. Please don't hold it against me, okay? I realized my mistake. And let's not forget all the little random miscellaneous stuff that also happened throughout the episode. There's always little random, Easter eggs or references happening here and there that just don't fit in with the rest of the major topics that I'm talking about. Wolfman has a brief cameo in this episode. He's at the explosives and hardware place again, so I guess he works there. Okay. And surprisingly enough, Crunchy also returned for a very brief cameo. More like, you know, kind of towards the last third of the episode, I want to say. It was fairly brief, and he didn't feel... He felt a slight bit more out of place compared to where he had cameos in previous episodes, but I digress. Like, you know, brief cameos from, you know, those two clearly recurring characters that don't really have much of a plot that ever seems to surround them. They just kind of happen to be part of the plot. Again, it would still be interesting if maybe at some point in time that an episode would maybe focus on, like, one of those characters. I think I mentioned something about the same happening with Crunchy in the previous review. So if something like that happened, that could be very interesting, especially given how often we see some of the recurring characters. Who are some of the other recurring characters that we've come across? Because I know that there's the Wolfman guy. He might be kind of interesting to have if he had an episode of his own. Crunchy would probably be interesting. Ninja Dave. It'd be interesting to see Ninja Dave. And speaking of cameos, there was also one little random one as well, where Chris and Elise, instead of going to Burgerphile for a meal, they ended up going across the street, which is Cafe Puree, even though it's supposed to take months for a reservation, and Chris and Elise are in casual wear and not in nice attire. And the fact that that restaurant is still even there after what happened with Dan versus the Fancy Restaurant. Yeah, okay. But yes, please don't hold the whole age gap thing against me. I had no freaking clue, okay? I was a fool. I was an idiot. I should have known. I don't know if I should have known better necessarily, but I feel like maybe I should have suspected or had a guess. I don't know. So please don't hold it against me, but that is all that I have to talk about this particular review. So thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this review as well as the reaction, and as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters.